Hey everyone, I'm Tammy Salenberger, the author of The One Inside 30 Days to Your Authentic Self. This podcast is for anyone curious about who they are, the different parts of themselves, and for those who want to connect with their true self. Welcome. I'm so glad you're here.
I am very excited to have my friend Valerie Louis on the show today. Valerie is a friend of mine, and we do some consultation together. And I just think she's beautiful and brilliant. And I can't wait for her to share herself and her heart with us. So, Valerie, why don't we start with you telling everybody where you are in the world and what you see if you look out the nearest window?
Yeah. So I'm in Cincinnati, Ohio. So that's the southern part of the state. And so when I look out my window, I see a little bit of green leaves. And I see some golden leaves and some burnt orange and some reddish leaves and sidewalks and streets. And it's sunny here today, and there's a little bit of a breeze. And it's just lovely. Some smattering of like golden leaves on the ground as well amongst the green grass. Um, yeah, it's probably one of my favorite times of year because I'm trained as a painter. So I look outside and I go, oh, look, there's a smattering of gold there and how it mixes with the green and just lovely little neighborhood, I guess.
I love that. And I love how you're
Yeah.
like, you see, because you're trained as a painter, you see that beauty differently than like
Yeah.
I would see that. Like I'm looking at my window. So it's fall. I don't know when this is going to be out. It might not be out for a while, but it's fall. It's
Yeah.
fall here too. But all the colors in New England are a little more muted for some
Mm,
reason. But I do see some reds and some oranges and some greens. But it's an overcast day, so it's not like popping as
mm.
much as I think I would like it. I would like it to pop. But I love that because as an artist, you're seeing it a little bit differently.
Yeah. All of a sudden my brain went like, oh, look how they sit against each other and the contrast and how they each, when things are opposite, like a green against a gold, a yellow, reddish, orange, they like pop, right? Like things pop. So I start to notice that. And I'm like, oh, look how interesting that dynamic is together. Um,
All right, and not to be too IFS nerdy about this, but I'm like,
uh-huh.
wow, that's kind of like a polarization. Like polarizations actually pop or get like a little bit stronger. Like a
Mhm.
part gets a little stronger when it's polarized with another part. So it's not to
Right.
be too, you know,
No. Yeah.
IFSy
Yeah.
about it, but that makes a lot of sense to me. All right, so tell everybody. So you're trained as an artist, but that's just you probably
Right.
have like 10 lists. So sort of can you run down in the part of you that doesn't want to do this, that see if it'll
Right.
just give you some space so you can like do the brag.
Okay, thank you. Thank you for that invitation. Like, because all these parts are like, oh, and I'm like, okay, we're gonna breathe some space. But I always like to start. I'm a very interdisciplinary studies person. Like, I like multiple disciplines, and I've been trained in all of my degrees in a interdisciplinary way, right? So even my bachelor's is an interdisciplinary bachelor of philosophy, right? So I'm always looking for connections in different ways. So my education and my kind of path to learning has incorporated all of those different threads coming together. So I have a PhD in educational studies from the University of Cincinnati, and I taught at the university for a while in curriculum and studies. I used to teach teachers, which I loved because I felt like I was making a huge impact in the world by teaching teachers, and they would go out. So I have a master's in women's studies and gender studies. So I taught as well in that department. I taught feminist approaches to religion and feminist approaches to spirituality at the university level, in addition to things like introduction to women's studies and gender studies. And then at the same time that I was doing my university degree, I was studying in the hands-on healing world. And that world I entered in 2001. I entered it because my father died in 1998, and I had a vision of him soon after he passed, and which wasn't. It was a very dramatic vision, which is different than the spiritual gifts that I had growing up and I had in college. And so I was like, hey, something's going on here. And I watched my father. My father had a brain tumor and cancer. And so I watched him get sick, and I watched my own experience of engaging with someone who was sick. And I wasn't equipped to be with someone who was sick, really. I don't think many of us are, frankly, especially at the tender age of 18 to 23.
Wow.
And so after he died, I found myself on a healer's table who happened to also be a social worker. And she started to say, I think that you have an aptitude for this. You should go find someone. So I found, her name is Rosalind Briere. I consider her like the grandmother of energy healing. She taught Barbara Brennan. She taught the Healing Touch people that went on to develop. So, I feel like she's a really central person in hands-on healing. And I have been really fortunate and lucky to be trained by her for many years. And I studied with her, and then I was ordained as a non-denominational minister of healing in her program. And it took me 9 years to get ordained, right? So this wasn't like a one quick thing. And at the same time, I studied with several other people, one of which who I consider just a dear, dear being to me was Subon Kusome. And so I learned ritual and ceremony with her. And in undergraduate, I studied with Julia Strakowski. I studied women's spirituality and ritual and ceremony. So I have this whole other side. I'm trained as a medium. I've done, traditional medium like readings for people. I've done house cleanings where spirits are there and, working with them. So I have I have two paths like intersecting and working with each other in various ways. And a lot of my research at university was on spirituality, was on healing. And I was definitely the outcast in that way. I was the person on the edge, really. Mm. Now it's not so edgy, but back then it was super edgy. And then I think what's useful before I get to IFS and that training is that I did have a brief moment in time in the master's in counseling program after my master's in women and gender studies. I thought I should go and I want to help people and I should be a counselor. So I did half of a master's, including some supervision, some counseling training. I worked in various populations doing counseling. And I had some friends of mine at one point in time, because at that time, therapists weren't touching people. And they said, which path are you going to choose? You're doing this healing path, you're doing this. And I really realized I wanted to work with the whole person, and I couldn't do that in that counseling realm. So I decided, actually, I was a teacher, I was an educator, but in a very relational way. So that's why I switched then to get my PhD in education. And I had some difficult experiences in the counseling program as well with gender, race, dynamics, and just, again, working with the whole person instead of pathologizing them. At one point, I got called a witch doctor in a class. And so I was just kind of like, okay, I need to move on. So that's kind of the training. And then in addition, I'm IFS certified level 3 practitioner. I'm also a somatic experiencing practitioner. I finished that program as well. I'm trained in yoga nidra. So I have a variety of skills I think I bring. I love research, I love writing, and I also love sitting with people and being with people. And I have done that at their happiest times in weddings, and I've done that at their most difficult times of death and separation. And I feel really honored to do the work that I do. So currently, my work now, I am kind of wear multiple hats. The one thing that I love to do and that I've done for the last couple of years is work with other healers, therapists, helpers, educators with their own personal work. And I think that's, in addition to all my learning, I think where I've learned the most is when I've been on other people's tables, when I've been in other people's classrooms, when I've been in other people's therapeutic spaces. I have a real I like my metacognition. So I'm always like, okay, I'm in the process, but I'm also watching what that therapist is doing, what that teacher is doing, what that healer is doing. And there have been some moments that have been really liberating for me, and other moments where the modality has been weaponized and it's been really problematic, right? And both of those are learning experiences for me. I know what it's like to be vulnerable in a space and see how someone cares for me and has regard for me, and then other times where it's about them and their viewpoint and how harmful it can be. So so I think kind of everything is a learning and training, and I kind of suck it all in the best I can.
Thank you for sharing all of that. Do you feel like it's all, this is not probably one of the things that we're supposed to talk about. Well, I don't know, I'm just going to say it. Do you think
Okay.
that it's all also kind of a spiritual path, like all of it? Like even if it's like PhD to teachers, whether it's that or medium or healing touch, like it's all, I'm kind of doing a swirly thing with my hand. Like it's all spiritual.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, one of the biggest initiations I had was doing my doctorate, writing that dissertation, and I used my spiritual gifts. I would call in my guidance. I would sit with spirit and I would say, speak to me in a way that my advisor will understand, right? Like, give me the words that my committee will understand, that other people will understand. It's not so different than when I sit with a client and I'm looking for words and I'm listening. Spirit, tell me what words to say for this person, right? Which is different than what I would say to the other person. So yeah, I definitely consider, when I was a little girl, I wanted to be a doctor and I wanted to be a fortune teller. Like, these were the two things that I wanted to be. And, I didn't know a professor. I didn't know what a PhD was as a little girl. So yeah, I absolutely consider it. And some things sometimes just happen for a reason, so I don't consider everything as spiritual in that way. I'm again on the edge in this spiritual community in the new age world. But when I do look back on my life and I think, if my father hadn't got sick and my father hadn't died when I was 23, my life would have been very different, right? And I think we all have those moments where things converge and diverge in our life. But yes, from the time I was very young, I had these dreams, and I didn't know what they would look like, and now I kind of look back and I'm like, hey, this is, I look to that younger self, I'm like, hey, look at this, is, here's your dream, who would have thought?
Yeah,
In a
yeah.
lot of ways. Yeah.
I love that. I love that.
Yeah. Yeah.
So what about this idea that as practitioners, we want to be better, or how we can be better? And I actually don't like this word better.
Right.
Right. So
Right.
yeah, so I think you don't either. I'm like, we don't like this word, but sort of I'm having a reaction to the word better. But you say, what does it mean to be a helper, facilitator, or a space holder for someone else's process and not get burned out?
Right. Yeah. I think we need to be more refined in our practice. Like, I wouldn't say better. I would say, how can you do things more elegantly? How can you do things more refined? How can you grow and bloom and not lose yourself in the process, right? Like, it's and yet infuse, it's this tricky thing. It's like infusing yourself in the process, while not. So I was meditating last night. This reminds me of meditation, right? Like, I have all these parts, right? I have all these parts, and then I have self, right? And self is like intimate and expansive, and it's never changing, right? Kind of thing. But there is, like, in my understanding, there's also this like shimmery overlay of that self, right? Like, so that holds certain parts of our identity or our wiring or our understanding, right? Like, and I think that is what, makes, kind of infuses between parts, and self is this shimmery, like, I don't, I don't know, covering in a way, but it's porous, right? And so I think for us as practitioners, the way I was taught as a healer, I would bring energy up through my feet and through my whole body, out my hands. So I was always trained to give myself a healing as I was giving somebody else a healing, right? Like when energy comes, when, you know, you're trained and it comes through your head into your hands, you know, there's a lot less of your body that it's touching. And so when it would come through my body, I would find even when I wasn't well, if I worked on someone and their healing was very much about them, it was not about me, but I got benefit from that, right? Like I got benefit. And so in my training in, you know, IFS and SE, it's like there's a lot of therapists around, right? And my training's just very different in that way. And I think that training of when I sit with someone and I'm getting the benefit of sitting in self that I'm with someone, I let it infuse me. I let it nurture me and be a presence to me, right? And I think that makes all the difference, right? And I think that that really is a different kind of training than I was taught when I was in graduate school for getting my counseling degree, right? Like, which I didn't get, but I have a background in knowing that training. And it's a different skill. You know, they're both complementary. I'm not, you know, but I don't think that it's talked enough about in that way.
Yeah, that is beautiful. Okay, so here's what's coming up for me.
Yeah.
I work with therapists, like consultant, IFS consultant, and I hear this all the time about, you know, either the burned out or think about my clients all the time or paperwork or whatever that is. I mean, most therapists don't feel the way you just described, right? Like I'm sitting with someone and, you know, I'm putting my hands on them. So forget sort of the hands thing, but sort of the idea that like I'm
Right.
putting my hands on them and I'm receiving something. As I'm giving something, I'm receiving something. Like this beautiful spiritual attuning is
Right.
happening between both of us. This is not how
Yes.
most of us experience therapy.
Yeah, you know, there's a tiredness at the end of my day, but there's not a burnout, right? And I mean, I know burnout from other things that I've done, and I don't have a tiredness. I'm fulfilled in a way that, right, I don't think most people do. You know, I think attunement is so important, right? Like this attunement, but also this resonance. Like I use my body as a tuning fork. I know my body intimately. I know what is mine. And then when a client, you know, I can say, hey, you know, I'm just curious. Like I have something going on in my heart. I'm wondering if, you know, if you tune in there, what might be, is something happening for you? And if it's not, that's okay, right? Like I mean, I'm wrong. There's no, you know, but this like I'm noticing my body and I'm noticing parts, I'm noticing all of these while I'm also noticing self, and I'm being with the client, right? Like this is a very different, and it sounds tiring, like as I say it intellectually, I'm like, oh my gosh, that sounds exhausting. But you know, after 20 years of working in this way, you know, it feels so natural to me. And I have lots of people in training say, how do you do what you do? And you know, it's funny, I thought about it once. I was like, well, I mean, some of it's my skill. I said, you know how I do what I do? It's very unsexy. I said, I've been trained to be in a meditative state with my eyes open.
Cool.
And
Okay.
right? Right? Do you feel that?
Yeah. Yeah, that feels very different, right? Like sort of like I'm noticing my body and what my body is teaching me and what I'm learning and what I'm picking up. And that feels very different than me being in my head and being like, okay, what F am I on? Should I
Right.
say, find the part in your body? Is this an unburdening? Is this an exhale? Is this a manager? You know what I mean? Sort of all the head stuff that I think is
Right.
important and we need to learn the process. But like,
Sure.
that's a lot of us are doing therapy from that, even IFS, right? We're doing it from that place and not from this sort of connected meditating with my eyes open.
Meditating, like I walk through the world in a meditative state in a lot of ways. And I'm not speaking about being ungrounded, right? Like, I mean, if you know me, I'm a very, you know, like I'm a very practical, very grounded person. Um, and it's, you know, that was when somebody asked me that, I said, I have been trained to meditate with my eyes open. I've been trained when I work with someone and I become in a meditative state, you know, and you know, things calm down, slow down for me. But I was trained to keep my eyes open so I could see if a client, what was happening with a client, you know, if they squinched their face, and if I'm at the table with my eyes closed, I can't see what's happening to the client on the table. And it's this, and so, now we're sitting up face to face, and I can calm myself, I can regulate myself, I can bring spirit in all with my eyes open. And I think as a culture, we've trained ourselves to close our eyes so we regulate ourselves, right? And vision, I have vision issues, so I know that the vision system can be really taxing and overwhelming. And I'm not talking about this for clients. As clients, sometimes, I tend not to close my eyes very much as a client, but there are times that I do, and my clients can absolutely close their eyes unless I think they're becoming ungrounded. And then I give the invitation to open their eyes so they can look around, like they can envision a part or some energy with their eyes open. So I do sometimes say to some clients, what would it be like if we did this with just a softer opened eyes? You don't have to be staring at me, you can look away or whatever, and it changes their experience.
Yeah, I love that. Can we back up, because I just had
Yeah.
this conversation the other day with somebody about what is self.
Yeah.
And so you just said a while ago, you said that there's self and there are parts, and then there's this glittery thing.
Yeah.
So tell me what you think the glittery thing is. And yeah, can we talk about that?
Yeah, sure. I think, there's a lot of discussion, right? And I mean, I will say that in addition to all my spiritual work, I am autistic, I'm neurodivergent, and I've had lots of conversations around autistic and IFS and just different things like that. And I have a background as a social justice and diversity educator as well. So, thinking in terms of like these social constructions, these identities we have, but also these real experiences, like my autistic nervous system, my autistic brain is unique. And yet I think we all have unique brains. So some say, the self is an autistic self. I'm not certain I agree with that. And parts are not autistic, right? Like somebody asked me once, well, which parts of you are autistic? I'm like, that's kind of a rude question, really. And so, as I've sat with it, I'm like, okay, parts are these parts that are reacting to things in the world. They're reacting to the sexism, the racism, the ableist, capitalist, really the compulsory culture, like I shouldn't talk this way, I shouldn't want this kind of relationship, I don't want all these, I need to be normal. Like our parts are like, where can we be normal? Like I in the best sense of the word, like they want to belong. And then we work with them, right, to be like, well, what is normal? What do you mean? What do you want? Like your conversation, you want direct conversation. Well, why are you limited? Why are you burdened by that? Right. And we've been taught to sit still, right, in our desks. And so it's like, no, I want to move. I want to do this, right? Like parts say, like, I'm sick of holding this all in. So then there's self, this like expansive, one with universe, kind of neutral figure. And then I think that there's this glittery, if to call it that, shimmery overlay. And I actually think that's where my autistic beingness comes. That's where I think, for me, the essence of my gender comes from. Like it's not a part and it's not a self. And I think that there's this middle layer that hasn't, it's like, okay, let's get out of the binary. Is it parts or itself? Like, IFS has created this binary between these two. And it's like, okay, well, what if there's like a third dynamic here? And that, that things kind of pass through that membrane, so before I did a lot of work with my nervous system, being autistic and trying to fit in, it was like everything was kind of squished together. And then there was self, when I tapped into self, it was really big. And now that it's like, oh, this is what my nervous system wants to do, it's like everything in my system has a bit more space. And so there's more of that shimmery overlay, and then parts and self interact in that way. I know I'm not articulating it super well, but it's like, it's just, I'm really fascinated when people start saying it's self, it's parts. And I'm like, okay, give me a third.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
you know,
Yeah. Well, this was the conversation was just this idea of like, well, there are things about my personality that are just
right.
me.
Me.
Doesn't feel like self,
Exactly.
doesn't feel like the spiritual essence, the soul, the God image, the divine in me. It
Exactly.
doesn't feel like that. It's definitely not parts. And it's not that it's just not, because then we think, okay, well, it's just an unburdened part, right? Or just a part that's never been
Right.
burdened. It's sort of a neutral part or a managerial part or something like that. But it's like, no, it's not that either, right? It's just sort of who
Right.
I
Right.
am, but it doesn't sort of exist on the spiritual. And I was like, yeah, I don't know. That's a great question. So I think you actually articulated it very well. I love that.
Yeah.
And I
Yeah.
would love for listeners to kind of think about that, right? To kind of, what self feels like, kind of self feels like in my body, what that feels like, and what
Right.
parts feel like energetically, but what feels like maybe you or your personality or something that's different about you that maybe doesn't fit in those categories.
Right.
Yeah,
Right.
I think it's a
It's like,
great invitation.
yeah, that personality, as a child, I would speak up when I would see injustice, right? Like it was just my personality. Now I probably have parts that were shamed by this and everything. And then I have the self that doesn't really speak up, that's just very neutral. So where does that, yeah, I don't think it's a part. I actually think that it is this personality kind of shroud that simply is, right? Like we all have uniqueness.
Yeah, that's
So yeah,
beautiful. I love it. I
yeah.
love it. So I love this idea. What does it mean to lead? So this kind of totally works with this. What does it mean to lead with curiosity and compassion? Like what
Yeah,
does that
yeah.
even mean?
So a lot of my clients, jargon's a big thing in the spiritual world, right? So somebody comes in and says, I feel blocked in my second chakra. And I'm like, what does that mean?
Yeah.
Like, what does that mean? Right? Like, I don't take anything as, I don't go, oh yeah, I know what that means. Because, that could mean to somebody, that means that it's sticky. To another person, that means that it's sharp. To another person, that means that it's concrete feeling, right? Like, or another person, it would be cotton candy, like I don't know what that means. So I think leading with curiosity and compassion, it's not a leading question. I literally do not know what it means when somebody says my second chakra is blocked. Like, and where is that? Where do you think that is in your body? So I ask a lot of those questions. I ask, and when I enter into a therapeutic space with someone, even an educational space, any kind of space, I don't know where it's going to lead. Like, I don't know where this conversation is going to lead. And it's like, so I'm just, and when I work with clients, it's not about me, right? Like, as a client, I enter in a space and I often know at least a starting point. But for me, it's like, well, where do you want to start today? What are you noticing inside today? And then I follow the lead, so that curiosity is like, I'm really curious about that. Or saying to the client, like, they might say, well, what do you think? And I'll be like, well, here's all the things. I said, what captures your curiosity? Which road do you want to go down? Right. And so I think to me, it really flattens that I'm the expert and that there's some hierarchy here, right? Like that I want to change that dynamic of power. I want people to get curious with themselves. And, they say, I want good communication. I'm like, well, what does good communication look like to you? Right. Because I have certain values about what communication, good communication looks like, but I'm not leading from that. I'm leading from what does that look like for you?
And I wonder if all of your body training, because I'm thinking about that like, right, if I'm if I'm talking to someone about what's happening in their body, I feel like I'm much more curious because I have no idea. Versus if they say I have a part that's critical, I'm like, I know I have an idea of what I think your critical
Yeah.
part, because I know all about critical parts and what they do and da 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 da.
Yeah.
But like I feel like it's almost like, again, I think for me as the therapist or practitioner, it's me dropping from my head what I think I
Right.
know, my knowing, my being in the power position, to me being in my body. Because if I'm
Yeah.
in my body, I'm a little bit more comfortable with the not knowing. And I'm a little more comfortable with like this, I'm moving my hands out like my body to your
Right.
body. Like, tell
Right.
me more. Like, I don't know. There feels like there's more openings for me
Yeah.
not to
Yeah.
know.
Right. Yeah, exactly. And I'm not, I mean, this sounds horrible, but I'm not working as hard. I mean, I see a lot of my therapist colleagues and they are working so hard to figure it out. Like they have, like, and I'm sure I can see, they have parts, they say themselves, I got to figure this out, or this is taking too long. The client's taking too long. I don't know what too long is with my clients, right? Like, I mean, yeah, certain clients, they'll say, I feel like I'm stuck, right? And be like, okay, you feel like you're stuck. But a lot of times in our culture, we want things to go really fast. So we want unburdening to be like immediate, and it's like, well, yeah, we've talked about this in different ways at different times. And so, yeah, I don't work near as hard, I think, in some ways, because I really am just curious. Like I really, really am curious with how everything is for the client, and I'm not trying to figure it out. I'm not trying to figure them out, and I'm not pathologizing them. I don't hear things that to me tick pathology that might to somebody else that has a different training, right? Like even autistic, right? To some people, you know, who have been trained with the DSM, it sounds like a pathology. And to me, it's not a pathology, right? Like to me, it's a way of life and a way of being and a way that my nervous system wants to move. I think, and nervous system, even polyvagal, it's like, well, we should be regulated all the time. That's not, you can't, you literally should not be regulated all the time. Like we are responsive, reactive beings. And what regulated looks like to one person is appeasement and freezing in another system, right? And so just because it looks non-pathologized doesn't mean that it is. And so this is where, again, that curiosity, well, what is it in this person's nervous system? Because in my other client, it could be freeze, but in this client, it's flow.
Mm, yeah.
And
Yeah.
curiosity is how you know that.
Yeah.
Right. And my clients really teach me, I can give you, for each client, I can give you their definition of a good relationship or what a relationship even looks like. For each client, they have their definition of good communication. And I'm there to follow that and support that and help them reclaim that.
The word follow, because follow, right? Follow feels flowy, and it also feels like, right, I'm not working as hard. I'm not trying to figure out, I'm following. I love
Right.
that. I
Yeah.
love the
Yeah.
follow. Love it.
Mm-hmm.
What about the spirituality in IFS? And where you say more nuance and complexity is needed to be brought into the process.
Yeah. So, I think, so first off, I have to say, I consider like IFS to me is kind of an art, right? Like, it's everybody could paint the same picture, the same scene, and it looks very different, right? It's kind of just brushstrokes, all those kinds of things. And so, again, from my background, I mean, I think IFS is a deeply soul tending process, right? And I think that when you start talking in kind of the binary, which new age spiritual worlds do talk about, good vibes, bad vibes, light, dark, um, you know, good, evil, all of those kinds of things, we start to get stuck in that. And I think that there's a lot of fear around, what's a spirit, what's an unattached burden, all of those kinds of things. And I understand the intellectualness of that because I come from a university background. I had to prove to people that the energy field existed in, so I understand that kind of Western have to prove that spirits exist and guidance exists and all of these things. And I think if we go in that process believing that these are some things that have to be proved, it comes out in our work, right? And we start to look for quick ways to validate that spirits exist or guidance exists, and in 20 years, people always come to me and say, this is going to sound so weird. And I'm going to say, no, it's not, because it's not. I've had accountants, I've had lawyers, I've had machinists, I've had educators, all of them tell me about their experiences with spirits and with guidance. This is not some fringe thing that has to be proven. It only has to be proven in the intellectual research world, right? And I have been in that space, but I also think that just because we can't measure something, possibly it's because we don't have the right tool to measure it, or we aren't looking at it with the right assessment. And so, when clients come to me, when I used to do spirit work, when I used to do a lot of spirit work, and I do a house cleaning, and say there'd be a spirit there that had, was an unattached burden, really, a spirit that's attached to this land, they shouldn't be there. And I would go in and I would talk to them. I used to talk about it as spirit counseling. I'd be like, what's wrong? They'd be like, I'm lost. I'm scared. Yeah, of course you are. Like, look around. Do you know where you're at? No. Oh my God. Like, why are you dressed so weird? I'm dressed so weird because I'm in, 2019 and you're from this other, right? Like, there's compassion there. I'm not afraid of them, right? Like, I've heard, it's like they're afraid of the light. Like, well, no, they maybe just don't know the light. They don't understand energy, right? Like, I don't consider light and dark. I think that comes from colonialist language. And I think that we can have more nuance than that. I think that darkness can be really fertile. There are cave rituals that happen. There are rituals that happen in the earth, or rituals that happen at night that are healing and nourishing and supportive to us. So if we only give our clients light, right? Like that, we're giving just an unbalanced experience. And then anything that is not light or not perceived as light, whatever that may be, is then bad and wrong. And this is a pathology of what many cultures just spoke as culture, right? Come tell me your dreams. Tell me what you saw on your walk, what you read on your walk. Like, it's not separate. Like, being spiritual to me is walking in the grocery store, it's walking down the street, it's speaking to my friend, I can talk to spirit in the restaurant. It's just part of talking to a friend. So I always tell my clients, I'm like, they're friends, and if they're not friends, then we need to find out why they're there. But there's this thought that, like, it's something other than what is natural and common. And I also think if you're not comfortable with that, or you can't handle the nuance and the complexity that's really there, and the subtleness, then you should refer out, or you should get consultation, right? I think that that's really important. I certainly get consultation, right? I certainly, refer out a lot. But I've never met I think there's just, I'm lost, I'm confused, I don't understand. And other people aren't understanding me, I think, in this real world. And so I think, again, that's curiosity and little fear, little fear.
What about why IFS is in the realm of the healer and the spiritual world?
Yeah.
It is an evidence-based practice. So it is an evidence-based practice, but actually, how about it's an evidence-based practice, right? And it really is in this realm, and I love this language. It's in the realm of healer, and in the spiritual world, not in the psychological world.
Yeah. I think it's soul work, right? I think one of the greatest things we can give clients is a deep regard for their humanity. And their humanity includes their soul, includes their spiritualness, right? It includes, all of them. And again, I think, legacy burden, cultural burden, these are ancestral healings, right? And ancestral healing has been around for a very long time. It's not a new phenomenon. And I think that there's a certain reverence that soul tenders and spiritual healers and teachers have cultivated for, a very long time to walk among the souls with reverence and regard and integrity. And I think that that's a skill set that, again, doesn't see this divide between daily life and spiritual life, right? It doesn't, it's an interwoven, non-binary experience. And I think it's really hard when you have been trained in a model that looks for pathology. I think there needs to be a conscious unlearning of that. And I think that that's that realm of healer and soul tender. And there are some things, like I have clients and they come to me and they're like, I have OCD and I have complex PTSD, and I'm like, that I'm not your person, and I think that's why I like working with a lot of other therapists and helpers, because what they say is when they work in this way with me, they're like, my work changes with my clients. I've experienced this attunement. I've experienced this regard. I've experienced this non-binariness of spiritualness. And I bring this to my clients and it changes my work, and I'm grateful for that, right? I'm grateful to know what my lane is. And I think I've thought a lot about this because there's lots of talk in IFS about lanes, the therapist and the practitioner, and I can't do, IFS consulting and, under the traditional guides and all of this. But then I look and I see lots of IFS practitioners and therapists are hungry to learn more about the spiritual aspect of IFS. They want to know more about working with guidance and spiritual energies and unattached burdens and all of these things. And I think that, yes, there's a group that are brilliant in the IFS world. And I think that there's more voices to be added. There's more experience that can be utilized in that way. I think the diversity of going to different people for consulting makes me a better practitioner, makes me a better helper. And I mean, I'm one of these people that I'm like, okay, I need to learn more about X, so I'm going to go. Like I have a really strong metacognition, so I can be like, I'm not so good at this, and I'm going to go find some place where I can learn some skill and have a little bit more elegance around this, right? And I realize not everybody has that, but that's a really big drive for me. And it's a really big drive for the people that I work with as well. Like I want people that are around me that are continuing to grow and challenge themselves and evolve. I hope I wasn't too controversial there.
I don't think so. I didn't feel that way in my system at all. Yeah, I don't know. I'm not feeling that. It might be, right? I would just have listeners sort of check in with their own parts and sort of see what's coming up, or if they're having reactions, or sort of what reactions they're having. So here's my stupid question of the day.
Yeah.
What can people do to harness is not the right word, but kind of harness their idea of their own spirituality, or sort of put like, I have an idea, like your spirituality and my spirituality look different. And so what can people do that? I know you don't have an answer to this question because it's a weird question, but like, what can people do to even harness their spirituality or deepen their spirituality, or like, what would you recommend? If people are sort of like, I'm a therapist, I'm a practitioner, I'm in my head, la, 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 like that kind of, which is great and wonderful and all that stuff. What would you suggest, or what would you advise?
Yeah, that's I mean, there's lots of different questions, lots of different answers to that. I think if somebody is in their head a lot, find somebody who does consulting or your own personal work that invites you out of your head a lot. Like I say all the time, like, okay, like, is that a thinking part? Is that, so tell me, I'm like, can we pause here? Can we, I really want you to see what's happening, get a sense of what's happening in and around your body. Like, is there an image that comes to mind? Is there a noise that comes to mind? Is there, or even words that come to mind? Like, what happens when you drop below your head? What do you notice? Even if it sounds stupid or silly, and people have brilliant things to say, and I'm a big fan of titration. I'm a big fan of pendulation. I'm a big fan of, moving really slow, and giving people just a drop of things. So I don't, leave them in their body. Then they pop into their head and I'm like, great, now we're back in your head. And then I'll be like, okay, after a while I'll be like, what's happening in your body? Can we stop here a moment? Like, I mean, I've always been like, hey, let's bring it back to the body. Hey, let's bring it back to, sensation, energy. But, image and words also come from this energy around us, this body around us, but there's a different quality to it. So I think, working with someone in that way, I think you can do that for yourself. Like, hey, I'm in my head right now, like, let me drop into my body. Let me see what's happening inside. I think if you have a spiritual practice and you only do it, say, in front of an altar, you only do it in a church or a synagogue or a mosque or all those things, I would recommend that you do it at your desk. I recommend you do it while you're driving. I recommend you do it while you walk, right? Like, I tell people all the time, they're like, what practice do like if they want to work spiritually with me, I'll be like, what is the practice you do? And can you do it while you're brushing your teeth?
I love that.
Right? Like, this is the integration.
So yes.
I'm doing it wherever. I don't have to do it in a certain place, in a certain way, at a certain time. I can have conversations with God while I'm brushing my teeth.
Yeah. So good. So good. Yeah. I love
and
that.
not expect an answer, right? Like, I mean, I think that's also, somebody may say, I drop into my body, there's nothing there. And I'm always like, tell me about the nothing.
Oh.
Right? Tell me about the nothing.
Yeah. So beautiful. So this is a big one. How IFS is suited to root us out of compulsory culture and into living a life that is more in line with, I love this, in line with our desires in nature. Here would be things like relationship structures, communication styles, neurodivergent, autistic, and the concept that continual self and regulation is not the goal.
Yeah.
It's a lot of words. And I love it.
So I think, I have this background in feminist studies, right? Like, so, and of course, context is just so important, again, to IFS or any work. We can't forget about context. We don't live in a vacuum. And so, there are certain, Audre Lorde talked about pretend choice. Marilyn Fry and Adrienne Rich talked about compulsory, like, heterosexuality. Like, there's certain things in our culture that we take just as what we should do, the way we should be. So, right, like we talked about sitting at your desk and you're at work or at school, and it should look a certain way. Like, we've all been kind of indoctrinated in our working selves look like this, our relationship selves look like this. We our sex should like this, everything, like has a cultural overlay, this expectation, and we have absorbed this, that a nervous system, the ultimate goal is for us to be calm, for us to be able to calm ourselves from a panic attack, for us to be centered and in self when we're having a heated discussion, right? Like this, like, speak from self. Like, do you hear, like, that's so police toning, right? Like, are you in self right now? Or that's a part of you talking, right? Like, there's nothing that makes my skin crawl more than somebody telling me that a part is talking. Because you'll hear a part talk really fast, but that's a boundary crossing.
You're like, right? You want to hear a part talk?
Right, exactly. So, or I have to be in self all this time, and that's the only way that you can hear me, right? Like, and so, in my own personal work, what happened was I started to realize that my nervous system, my body wanted to move a certain way, wanted to talk a certain way, wanted to be a certain way. And instead of saying, no, that's not healthy, right? Like, it's healthy to look somebody in their eye, when you talk. And if you don't do that, there's something wrong with you, right? Like, or I need to get up and move and I'm supposed to sit in my chair. There's something wrong with me, right? Like, and what happened was, when I started to say, I don't care what I'm supposed to do. This is what my body wants to do. Like, I don't care that I was raised in gender role dynamic. Now, I was very young when I, said I don't want anything to do with those traditional gender roles, and somewhere inside me went, yeah, great, but others, they are like, oh my gosh, my whole relationship is based off of these gender roles because that's what society said a relationship was supposed to look like. And I don't want that anymore. Or this is what a woman looks like. This is what a man looks like. And these are the only two choices, right? Like, these are all the things that society has, it's just been compulsory. This is what you do. And I think parts really suffer when it's like, I call it a cliche life, right? Like, in some way, like, so as an artist, it's like, I could draw you a tree in a very cliched way, right? I could, here's a tree. Or I can draw you a tree in the way that I really see it, in the way that it's really presenting itself to me in a very complex, nuanced, textured way that is unique to the tree. And that's what I think when we invite parts to unburden this compulsoriness, we take on our own unique, affirming way. And whether it's affirming of our own uniqueness of gender, of our uniqueness of how we want to structure a relationship. It's, my nervous system works this way. Oh, look, this is autistic, right? It's more autistic. And that label, to some, it sounds very pathologizing, but to those of us in the autistic world, it's often very freeing, because it's like, oh my gosh, like, this compulsoriness that I've been trying to stuff myself in has been killing me. It's been harming me. And look, if I just let my nervous system do what it wants to do, if I don't force myself to look in somebody's eyes, like, how much better do I feel inside? How much more liberated and free do I feel inside, right? And those labels, like, if you sit in a room of autistic people, you've met one autistic person, you've met one autistic person, right? Like, I mean, so, it's like, sometimes labels again are like, what does that mean? But when somebody says I'm non-binary, yet, and they've been trying to fit themselves into a certain mold, and I think even if we're in traditional molds of, say, masculinity, it, with those boxes, men don't, those who are identify as men don't get to identify what does that mean for them, and that full range of that could mean emotions. In the past, it hasn't meant emotions, or it's only certain professions, right? Like, and once we, open up that box for all not to feel that compulsoriness, then we get to choose and live a very interesting and unique dynamic, right? Like, I think that's, and I think IFS, repeatedly I meet parts that are like, I just want to communicate in this way, and I just hate these cultural rules, right? And you're like, yeah, or like, I don't want to do this job, or I don't want to work this much. This is killing me. Yeah. I think our parts are really smart. I think that they just really are not, they want to be compulsory. They want to work in that culture because that's safe to them, right? Like, it's safe to be seen as neurotypical. It's safe to be either man or woman, pick the two. It's safe to be heterosexual. It's safe to be in a monogamous relationship. Like, culturally, these are safe. And safety is important to nervous systems, right? Like, we want to survive. That is our goal. And so, to unburden ourselves in this way is, a challenge, and it can feel very unsafe. and I have clients all the time, especially in spiritual gifts. They'll say, why can't I just give my spiritual gifts, be open with them? And I said, because it's not safe to. I said, but the question is, can you be honest with yourself? Like, I don't need to tell everybody what kind of relationship I have, because it may not be safe. But can I be honest with myself with what kind of relationship I want? Can I be honest with myself that I'm autistic? I don't go tell everybody that, you know, but it's like, can I honor that I know that this is not a safe space, and so I do have to mask in a certain way, but I'm not lying to myself. And even so I don't want to minimize, it's certainly not safe for a lot of groups in our society these days. And if we continue to not honor that it's not safe for us, and we just say, I should be this way, that's detrimental to us.
That's so beautiful. I was thinking about maybe not even knowing some of the things, like let's say, like for me, it's like, be nice and sweet in the world.
Right.
And it's like, well, that just feels like who I am. But I
Right.
don't know that that's actually true.
Right.
I think it's the
Yeah.
safest way for me. It was the safest way for me
Right.
to be in my family, the safest way for me to be in the world right now, I think. But I think a part thinks that. And yes, I really appreciate what you're saying. And I'm just noticing there's just a lot of curiosity when I think about some characteristics of me that feel like
Right.
me, that maybe are actually burdens, and actually
Right.
maybe not the way my body wants to be in the world.
Right. Yeah.
Noticing
I
that.
think I ask parts often, you know, I mean, I use my SE with parts a lot of the time. So I'll be like, can you ask the part like what it wants to do now or what it wants to do next? So they'll be like, oh, I want to be free. Or I don't want to be sweet. Like, yeah, I just want to say it. And then you could ask the part, well, why, well, I don't feel safe. Right. And I think somebody or some part
I
saying,
have a part to say. I'm sorry to interrupt you, but I just heard
no,
I would tell everybody off.
right. Yeah. Like, and so then sometimes you think, well, how, let's just, I have parts that like to tell people off, and sometimes I've done it. And other times I've thought, what's the nicest way I can say this? Right. Like, and, I mean, because we are in relationship, but the world isn't safe, and for lots of different people, for lots of different reasons. And we do want to cultivate for our clients and for ourselves a sense of safety internally. Um, and but that can wax and wane, and nobody's doing, what's happened is that I'm not calm has become, if I'm not calm, there's something wrong with me. If I'm not calm, there's a pathology and I need to fix it. I have anger, there's something wrong with me, I need to fix it. Like, no, your nervous system is actually wired for anger. Like that's a fight response, right? Like, so we've pathologized this, like, being human to be calm and regulated. And I always tell my clients, I want more capacity for you. I want more flexibility. I want, when you're activated, right? Like when you're angry, can you move out of that state, right? Like when you're depressed or sad, because we're all going to be, can you find even a micromillimeter of difference, right? Like, and it's not a huge variation, right? It's like, when I'm in a frozen state, am I able to just even move my eyes around, right? Like, can I just unfreeze my eyes? But we're a culture that like wants these huge changes, dramatic changes, and we want staticness at the same time. Like, I should just be this calm, regulated, complacent person the whole time. And I, I I think that that's a shame. I think lots of people are walking around suffering when they don't have to, because things that are natural to them, things that their body wants to do, has been pathologized.
Yeah, beautiful, beautiful. So is there anything else you want to share? I mean, that was beautiful, so good. Anything else you feel
Yeah,
like you want to share before we end?
I don't think so. I feel like we've like covered a whole bunch of ground, which is great. I mean, to me, it feels really integrated, right? Like, I mean, I I really appreciate all the conversation that we had. Yeah, I don't think so. I'm
love
just
it.
looking over my notes.
Good.
Yeah.
So, why don't I ask you the last question I always
Yeah.
ask? And then before I do that though, where can people find out about you and what you're doing? And just kind of keep in touch with you.
Yeah. So I have a website. It's my name. It's, www.valerielouis.com. And that's probably the best place to connect with me. Up until very recently, I had an Instagram, so I don't have that anymore. But I do have I have a mailing list I put out quite regularly that is some sales content, but often it's invitations. It's called Sacred Invitations is my newsletter, and it's a lot of invitation about unlearning these compulsoriness and spiritual practices and spiritual engagement. So I'd love to have you be a part of the newsletter and to check out my website. And then I'm also on the IFS directory, so people can always find me through that as well.
Perfect. Okay.
Yeah.
So last question, this one might be hard for you.
Yeah.
But if you could do something different in your life and you had to do something different and you just listed like a million things. So you had to do something different, what would you do instead?
I wrote a whole list for this question, right? So here's what I'd be a writer, I'd be an artist, I could be a lawyer, a teacher, a rabbi, a researcher, a librarian, a speechwriter. I thought about that. I was like, I think that would be cool. I could see many different possibilities for me beyond just this, but that was the list I came up with. But this idea that we all have one path, again, I like to unburden my clients from that because it's a lot of suffering and for my own self, it's like I could have multiple paths and that's, feels really lovely instead of searching for the path, so I guess my different job career possibilities speak to that.
I love that. Well, thank you so much, Valerie. It was great to talk to you. And I just appreciate you so much.
Yeah, I appreciate you too, Tammy. Thank you so much. It was so great. So great. I feel so honored.
Thanks for hanging out with us today. If you like this episode, please subscribe, rate, like, all the things. My book is available at your favorite independent bookstore or all the places books are available. You can also visit my website, tammysallenberger.com, where you can download a free meditation on getting to know your should parts. There's parts of you who remind you of what you should be doing. They sound a bit critical at times. Yes, we all have them. You can follow me at IFS Tammy on Instagram and Twitter and the One Inside Facebook page. I'm so grateful for Jack Reardon, who created the new music. Jack is a graduate of Derek Scott's IFS Stepping Stone program. Thanks, Jack, for getting me. And to you, thanks for listening.